once took a year off from college and ran away to Santa Fe, New Mexico. Can you tell? With my father dying in a hospital bed 1,000 miles away, and my mother all the way across the Atlantic in training to be a midwife, I found myself wandering the universe, wondering why some god or another had pulled the plug on my relatively happy childhood and cast me adrift. At one point in my adventure, after about 5 days of eating nothing but soy nuts, with the southwest winds beginning to howl around my middle, I was so hungry that I ate a dog biscuit. TMI, I know, I've been told. It looked like a cookie until it wasn't. I was a college kid barely surviving on the threadbare wage I was earning as an intern at the local newspaper, and I should never have been allowed to get that hungry. So, 8 years ago, when this university invited me to teach the first reading and writing class in the local shelter, I jumped at the chance. What came after was the Glass House Shelter Project. And I have been fortunate enough with all sorts of collaborations to take this work into shelters all throughout the greater Boston area. You know, we do it in prisons all the time, right? Why not homeless shelters? Glass houses, like greenhouses, I reasoned, are fragile, but they're also catchers of the light, able to grow what they hold within them, authentic harbingers of the truth by virtue of being transparent. It also seemed to me that first year that my students were very much like glass houses too. Here were a people at first glance who could be more grateful for a sunny day and a warm shower than most of us get a chance to be. Indeed, I had no idea of the magnitude of what I was about to learn from these people about shame. Fast forward to 2 years ago when fellow poet Charlie Bondis and I decided to curate an anthology on the topic of shame, and our inbox filled up with the world's secrets. Probably won't come as a surprise to you to hear that as a nation, we never see ourselves as enough, right? It has something to do with this keep up with the Joneses thing that we do. We can never be rich enough, thin enough, pretty enough, you know? On and on with the enough. We're never enough. And that's exactly what landed in our inbox. Indeed, as a nation, we do see ourselves as too hungry, but also too fat, too greedy, but also too poor, too married, too single, too lonely, too gay, too trans, too incarcerated, too innocent, too black, too white, too, and too. Never enough. And when never enough is all you get, shame becomes a way of life. Indeed, it can become the pathos of an entire nation. My homeless students have learned how to inhabit their shame. They wear it like a beloved, ragged old coat. And that can be dangerous. I teach a course at the university here called Homelessness and the Self-Perpetuating Cycle of Shame. And college-aged youth, kids like that girl I was back in Santa Fe, a little drunk on my own rootlessness, constitute the fastest growing segment of the homeless population. But truth be told, that course is not about homelessness. It's about unbelongingness. Kids need to be loved. We all need to be loved. And whatever it is that makes us feel less than loved is what becomes the birthplace of our shame, of our unbelonging. What I have learned about shame through my own experience and through my work is that whether it is cast upon us at birth or self-inflicted, it can destitute us. When we are battered enough by the elements, by the Katrinas, the Irmas, by the Florences, by and underemployment, by physical and mental disability, by incarceration and racism, sexism, and all the other isms, all the negative isms, hope disappears and shame steps in. And then, so too, perhaps the roof to our house disappears, and then the keys to the car and, well, clean socks. When you're 3 months short of clean socks, you know you've arrived in the never, never land of the dispossessed, where shame rules. Without fail, my students are always able to tease the thread of shame out of every narrative I hand to them. It's kind of like buying a red car and taking it out on the highway and finding out that every other bugger on the planet has bought a red car too. I'm British, so I can say things like that. When we go out into the world, what we see first is what we know. And sometimes, sadly, what we know is loss. Eventually, all of the students in my writing classes become shame excavators. I don't care whether it's their shame or mine, Nick Flynn's or Juno Diaz's, Amy Tan's or Virginia Woolf's, Salman Rushdie's. The magic is in the seeing. James Baldwin knew something about unbelonging and might well have been writing about shame when he wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." That is what is at stake here with my students, our children, our brothers, our sisters, is the chance to face down all the world's shame every time we open a book and put pen to paper. I once had a student that brought me a piece of paper that had clearly been crumpled up and flattened out many times over. The paper was soft with wear, with the battle that had transpired upon it. "I wrote this last night and I thought maybe you'd want to look at it," he said. He was shaking as he handed it to me, sweating. At first, I was stunned by the gibberish of it, this from a guy who was pretty articulate. But as I read, the words began to form sentences, and they picked up pace and told the story of a boy who had been raped by his godfather at the age of 8 years old. He had never told anyone until then what had happened to him 50 years earlier. His courage. His beautiful courage brought me to my knees. I, too, am a writer as well as a teacher. I, too, am a shame excavator. And I see you. There is probably someone in here right now unbelonging someone else, pulling your arm off the armrest next to you, or you didn't get quite the polite hi you might have wished for on the way in. We unbelong ourselves and we unbelong each other all the time, and gosh darn it, we just need to cut it out. Heck, it's the belonging that's the illusion, right? No two of us are the same, which basically makes us misfits. The only commonality, the only mutuality we can hope to find in the world comes through our stories, through our shared humanity. It's how we connect to one another. It's how we find ourselves. It's how we find home. I teach my students how to find shelter inside the words. About 600,000 people sleep rough in this country every single night, in tents, in cars, under bridges, on the grates that blow hot air from the bowels of the public libraries and other such behemoths deep in the city's grooves. About 18.5 million reported deep poverty between 1959 and 2015. But that's only one measure of our unbelongingness. According to Stop Bullying, Inc., 70.6% of students report seeing bullying in their schools. And yet, interestingly, only 28% of students report being bullied. The shame of our unbelongingness is unspeakable. Fact, I have yet to meet a homeless student who has not been bullied. Indeed, for some of us, bullying has gone on for so long and is so frequent. And then when the teacher claps her hands and gets us to line up, we automatically go to the back of the line. The hardest thing about homelessness is the way people look right through you. A lot of my students have said that to me. It's tough when you have to choose between getting a place to live and getting an education. It's tough when your parents don't recognize the gender you inhabit. It's tough when the foster kid system has failed you and you've gotten 10 different versions of domestic abuse instead. My students call this kind of unbelongingness, hanging out at the mall, couch surfing, sleeping in their cars. It sounds way cooler. Homelessness is the thing that shall not be named. And yet we have a whole high school here in this city that caters to kids who are homeless. And that speaks realms about America in 2018. There was a social experiment that they did in New York in 2014. The New York City Rescue Mission did it. Called the Make Them Visible Project, and they filmed participants walking past relatives who were disguised as homeless folks. I ask you, would you pass your mother by on the street if she was dressed in rags? That is never good enough. Not now, not ever. Many of my Glass House Shelter Project students have been incarcerated. Some are level 3 sexual offenders. Many have been to war and killed other human beings. Some are disabled. Still others have degrees from such fine institutions as MIT and Stanford, Suffolk and Middlebury, Salem State University, and find themselves aged out of the labor force, victims of the foreclosure crisis, and underemployed. And then there's the immigrants who come here and are forced to work in low-paying jobs because we do not recognize the degrees they have worked so hard for in their homeland. And then, of course, the kids. This fall, we are moving another university reading and writing course off-site into a community classroom here on the North Shore for about 20 underprivileged students. That class becomes a way for us to invite them to the party that is America. I will begin by telling them that we cannot truly see ourselves until we find ourselves, our humanity, in someone else's story. That a shared burden is a more movable one. I will tell them that when we read, we begin to see all of the ways in which we unbelong ourselves. We begin to investigate the root systems of those faulty beliefs, to seed the soil of our lives with hope. When we write, we start to disappear the lines between us and them. We are all the beggar and the thief, the saint and the sinner, the mother of hordes and the father of no one. Truly. I once had a student who came to class, big bushy beard, long hair, hat pulled way down over his face. Came in, sat down, immediately began to snore. Turns out Joe suffered from narcolepsy, which is why he was in the shelter. And at first he just sat and listened. He was kind of a shy guy, but soon he began to write. And before I knew it, the stories were pouring out so fast that he just talked and I typed. By the end of the 3 months that we had together that fall, the beard disappeared. He got a haircut, started changing his shirt every day, and the brim of his hat came right up over his brow to reveal the keenest of brown eyes. And Joe had a girlfriend. Emily Dickinson wrote, "I have felt it shelter to speak to you." And Joe and I concur. Stories allow us to reimagine ourselves, to reframe the world in which we live in such a way as to create doors where there are none, windows out of walls. Read books, folks. Write your stories down. It short-circuits the shame, stops the howling, and makes the world just a tad more hospitable. Thank you.